A scream shattered the quiet of Maplewood Lane, sharp and raw, slicing through the hum of suburban life. Was it possible that Karen, the HOA's self-appointed queen, had just shoved a pregnant woman down a flight of steps? The question hung in the air like smoke, curling around the manicured lawns and pastel houses. My heart pounded as I sprinted across the street, the world blurring into streaks of green and beige. My wife, Lila, lay crumpled at the base of our porch steps, her hands clutching her swollen belly, her face pale with shock. Karen stood above her, arms crossed, her lips curled into a smirk that didn't waver, even as I dropped to my knees beside Lila. She tripped, Karen said, her voice cold as the concrete beneath us. Clumsy thing, waddling around like that. The words hit like a slap, but Lila's shallow breaths kept my focus. I cradled her face, whispering reassurances, while neighbors peeked from behind curtains, their silence louder than any protest. The ambulance's wail grew closer, but Karen didn't move, her eyes glinting with defiance. This wasn't just a fall. This was war. The day had started ordinarily enough. Lila and I had moved to Maplewood Lane 6 months ago, chasing the dream of a quiet life for our soon-to-be family. The neighborhood was a postcard of perfection, neat hedges, white picket fences, and a homeowners association that ruled with an iron grip. Karen, the HOA president, was its enforcer. She was a wiry woman in her 50s, with a perm as unyielding as her opinions, and she patrolled the streets like a general. Our first encounter came when she fined us for a mailbox that was 2 inches too tall. Lila laughed it off, her kindness a shield against Karen's pettiness, but I saw the warning signs. Karen didn't just enforce rules, she wielded them like weapons. When Lila painted our front door a soft blue, Karen left a violation notice taped to it, claiming it disrupted the neighborhood's aesthetic harmony. Lila, 7 months pregnant and radiant, shrugged and repainted it. I admired her grace, but I felt the tension building, a storm brewing behind Karen's pinched smiles. That morning, Lila had been gardening, her hands deep in the soil, planting marigolds to brighten our small front yard. Karen had stormed over, clutching a clipboard, her voice shrill as she berated Lila for using unauthorized flowers. "This is a violation of Section 4, Clause 12, she barked, jabbing a finger at the blooms. Lila, ever calm, explained they were a gift from her mother, meant to celebrate the baby. Karen's eyes narrowed, and she scribbled something on her clipboard before stalking off. I was at work when Lila texted me, her words light but tinged with unease. "Karen's on a rampage again. Don't worry, I'm fine." I wasn't worried then. I should have been. By the time I got home, the marigolds were uprooted, scattered across the lawn like casualties, and Lila was on her way to the hospital. The paramedics arrived, their movements swift and practiced. Lila gripped my hand as they lifted her onto the stretcher, her eyes wide with fear but steady with trust. "The baby's okay," she whispered, as if willing it to be true. I nodded, unable to speak, my throat tight with rage and dread. Karen watched from her porch across the street, her arms still crossed, her expression unreadable. Neighbors whispered, their voices a low hum, but no one approached her. No one dared. The ambulance doors closed, and as we sped away, I caught a glimpse of Karen turning back into her house, as if nothing had happened. My hands shook, not just from fear for Lila and our unborn child, but from a fury I hadn't known I could feel. This wasn't over. At the hospital, the hours blurred into a haze of sterile white walls and beeping monitors. Lila was stable, thank God, but the baby's heartbeat was being monitored closely. A fall like that, the doctor said, could have been catastrophic. Bruises bloomed across Lila's arms and legs, and every mark felt like a personal accusation. I sat by her bed, holding her hand, replaying Karen's words. She tripped. The lie was so blatant it burned. Lila, exhausted but resolute, squeezed my hand. "She pushed me, Tom," she said softly. I was at the top of the steps, trying to explain about the flowers, and she just pushed. The confession landed like a stone in my chest. I wanted to storm back to Maplewood Lane and confront Karen, but Lila's quiet strength held me there. "We'll handle it," she said. "Together." I called my brother, Mike, a Marine station nearby. He'd always been the one I turned to when things got tough, and this was beyond tough. Mike listened, his voice steady, but laced with anger. "I'll be there tomorrow," he said. "And I'm bringing some friends." I didn't know what he meant, but I trusted him. Back home that night, I couldn't sleep. The image of Lila falling, of Karen's smirk, played on a loop in my mind. I walked to the porch, where the marigolds still lay scattered, and something snapped inside me. Karen wasn't just a bully. She was a menace, and she'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I didn't know how, but I swore she'd face consequences. The next morning, Mike arrived with 5 other Marines, their presence a quiet storm rolling into Maplewood Lane. They were all in civilian clothes, but their posture screamed discipline, their eyes sharp with purpose. Mike hugged me, his grip firm, and introduced his squad. James, a towering man with a gentle smile. Sarah, whose calm demeanor hid a steel core. Marcus, who cracked his knuckles absent-mindedly, and the twins, Ethan and Lucas, whose synchronized movements were almost eerie. "We're here for Lila," Mike said. "And to set things right." I nodded, grateful but uneasy. This wasn't just about support, it was a reckoning. As we stood on my porch, planning our next move, Karen's front door swung open. She stepped out, clipboard in hand, oblivious to the storm gathering at her gate. Karen's eyes widened for a split second as she saw the 6 Marines standing in a loose semicircle outside her gate, but she recovered quickly, her face hardening into its usual mask of authority. "What's this about?" she demanded, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. She clutched her clipboard like a shield, her pen poised as if she could write us all into submission. Mike stepped forward, his voice low but steady. "We're here about Lila. You pushed a pregnant woman down her own steps. We need to talk." Karen's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but close enough to make my blood boil. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. She fell. "I was there trying to help. You should be thanking me." The lie was so bold it stunned me, but Mike didn't flinch. He took another step, his boots heavy on the pavement, and the others closed in slightly, their presence a silent promise of accountability. I wanted to lunge at her, to demand the truth, but Sarah's hand on my shoulder kept me grounded. "Let us handle this," she whispered. Her eyes were locked on Karen, calm but unyielding. Karen's gaze darted between us, her confidence wavering as she realized she wasn't facing a lone, shaken husband, but a united front. The neighbors, drawn by the tension, began to gather, their whispers growing louder. Karen straightened, her voice rising. "This is private property. You're trespassing. I'll call the police." Mike didn't blink. "Go ahead," he said. "We'll wait. And we'll tell them what you did to Lila." For the first time, Karen's mask slipped, and I saw a flicker of fear in her eyes. But she wasn't done yet. The standoff was interrupted by a new figure emerging from the crowd, Mrs. Ellison, a quiet widow who lived 3 houses down. She was in her 70s, frail but fierce, her hands trembling as she clutched a worn notebook. "I saw it," she said, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "I saw what you did, Karen." The crowd hushed, and Karen's face paled. Mrs. Ellison stepped closer, her eyes blazing. "I was watering my roses. I saw you argue with Lila about those flowers, and when she turned to go inside, you pushed her. Hard. I didn't say anything yesterday because I was scared, but I'm not scared anymore." The revelation hit like a thunderclap, and Karen's clipboard slipped slightly in her hands. I felt a surge of gratitude for Mrs. Ellison's courage, but also a twist of pain. Lila had been alone, vulnerable, and this woman had seen it all. Karen recovered quickly, her voice dripping with disdain. "You're mistaken, Dorothy. Your eyes aren't what they used to be." But Mrs. Ellison didn't back down. She opened her notebook, revealing pages filled with dates, times, and notes. "I've been keeping track of you, Karen. Every fine, every threat, every time you bullied someone on this street. You've been terrorizing this neighborhood for years." The crowd murmured, some nodding, others looking away, ashamed of their own silence. Karen's face flushed, but she doubled down. "This is slander," she snapped. "I'll sue you, Dorothy. I'll sue all of you." Her voice cracked, and I realized she was unraveling, her control slipping like sand through her fingers. Mike took another step, his voice calm but laced with steel. "We're not here to argue, Karen. We're here for the truth. And we're not leaving until you admit what you did." The Marines tightened their semicircle, their presence overwhelming but disciplined. Karen's eyes darted to the crowd, searching for allies, but the neighbors' faces were a mix of anger and relief. For years, she'd ruled Maplewood Lane with fear, fining people for minor infractions, threatening lawsuits, and turning neighbor against neighbor. Now her reign was cracking. I stepped forward, my voice shaking but clear. "Lila could have lost her baby," I said. "She's in the hospital because of you."
"Why?"
"Why did you do it?" Karen's lips parted, but no words came. For the first time, she looked small. Then came the twist none of us expected. A teenage girl pushed through the crowd, her face streaked with tears. It was Emily, Karen's daughter, who rarely left the house, always overshadowed by her mother's domineering presence. "Mom, stop lying," she said, her voice trembling but fierce. "I was in the window. I saw you push her. I saw everything." The crowd gasped, and Karen's face went white. Emily's words were a dagger, cutting through her mother's facade. "You've been like this my whole life," Emily continued, her voice breaking. "Controlling, mean hurting people just because you can. I can't keep quiet anymore." Karen staggered back, her clipboard falling to the ground with a clatter. The truth was out, and it wasn't just Lila's story anymore. It was the neighborhood's, Emily's, and mine. The air on Maplewood Lane grew thick with tension, the kind that makes your skin prickle and your breath catch. Karen stood frozen, her daughter's words echoing like a gunshot. Emily's tear-streaked face was a mirror of pain and defiance, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The Marines stood firm, their eyes locked on Karen, while the neighbors' murmurs grew into a low roar of disbelief and anger. Karen's hands shook as she bent to pick up her clipboard, but her authority was gone, shattered by the weight of truth. "Emily," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "you don't understand." But Emily shook her head, stepping back into the crowd, leaving her mother exposed. I felt a pang of pity for Karen, but it was drowned by the memory of Lila's crumpled form, her hands protecting our unborn child. Mike spoke again, his voice cutting through the haze. "You can't hide from this, Karen. Too many people saw what you did. Too many people know who you are." He gestured to the crowd, where faces once cowed by Karen's rules now burned with resolve. Mrs. Ellison clutched her notebook, her frail frame radiating strength. Other neighbors stepped forward, their voices rising. "You fine me for my kids' chalk drawings," one said. "You threatened to tow my car for parking an inch off," another added. The complaints poured out, a flood of grievances long suppressed. Karen's eyes darted, searching for an escape, but there was none. The Marines, the neighbors, her own daughter, they formed a wall she couldn't breach. I stepped closer, my voice steady despite the storm in my chest. "Lila's in the hospital, Karen. Our baby's at risk because of you. You don't get to walk away from this." Her eyes met mine, and for a fleeting moment, I saw something human, fear, maybe regret, but it vanished as quickly as it came. "You can't prove anything," she snapped, but her voice wavered. She turned to the crowd, raising her hands. "This is a witch hunt. You're all jealous, trying to tear me down because I keep this neighborhood perfect." The words were desperate, a last grasp at control, but they fell flat. The crowd wasn't hers anymore. Sarah, the Marine with a calm demeanor, stepped forward, her voice soft but piercing. "You pushed a pregnant woman, Karen. You endangered a life. That's not perfection. That's cruelty." The word hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Karen's face twisted, and she opened her mouth to retort, but no words came. Instead, she turned and fled toward her house, slamming the gate behind her. The clang of metal echoed, a hollow sound in the charged silence. The Marines didn't move, their presence a quiet promise that this wasn't over. I looked at Mike, my heart pounding. "What now?" I asked. He clapped a hand on my shoulder. "We make sure she faces the consequences." The crowd lingered, their anger giving way to a shared sense of purpose. Mrs. Ellison approached me, her notebook still in hand. "I've got more," she said quietly. Years of her nonsense, documented. Fines, threats, even letters she sent to scare people into compliance. "I'll give it to the police." I nodded, grateful for her courage, but my mind was on Lila. I needed to get back to her, to tell her that the truth was out, that Karen's reign was crumbling. As I turned to leave, Emily approached, her eyes red but resolute. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I didn't know how to stop her before. I wanted to say something comforting, but all I could manage was a nod. Her pain was real, and it complicated the rage I felt toward her mother. Back at the hospital, Lila listened as I recounted the morning's events. Her eyes widened at Emily's betrayal, but her face softened with empathy. "That poor girl," she said. "Living with Karen can't be easy." I marveled at her compassion, even now, bruised and tethered to monitors. She squeezed my hand. "You did good, Tom. But don't let this consume you. We've got a baby to focus on." Her words grounded me, pulling me back from the edge of vengeance. But the fight wasn't over. Karen's defiance, her refusal to admit guilt, meant this was only the beginning of the battle. The next day, Maplewood Lane buzzed with a new energy, as if the neighborhood had woken from a long, oppressive sleep. Word of Karen's actions and Emily's confessions spread like wildfire, fueled by whispered conversations and group chats. The police arrived that afternoon, summoned by Mrs. Ellison's detailed account and the testimony of other neighbors who'd finally found their voices. I stood on our porch, watching as an officer knocked on Karen's door. She answered, her face a mask of indignation, but the clipboard was gone, replaced by a nervous twitch in her hands. The officer's questions were calm but pointed, and Karen's responses grew shrill, her denials weaker with each passing minute. The neighbors watched, no longer hiding behind curtains, their presence a silent demand for justice. Lila was released from the hospital that evening, her bruises fading but her spirit unbroken. The baby, miraculously, was unharmed, though the doctor warned us to monitor her closely. As we drove home, Lila rested her hand on mine, her touch a reminder of what mattered most. But the sight of Karen's house, its pristine lawn and smug perfection, reignited my anger. "She can't just get away with this," I said, my voice tight. Lila nodded, her eyes distant. "She won't," she said. "But we need to be smart, Tom. For our family." Her wisdom steadied me, but the fire in my chest burned on. The police investigation moved quickly, bolstered by Mrs. Ellison's notebook and Emily's statement. Karen was called in for questioning, and the neighborhood held its breath. Rumors swirled. Some said she'd hired a lawyer, others that she was planning to move. But Karen didn't run. She doubled down, posting a letter on the HOA bulletin board claiming she was the victim of a vicious smear campaign. The letter was torn down within hours, replaced by a petition to remove her as HOA president. Over half the neighborhood signed it, a quiet rebellion that spoke louder than any protest. The confrontation came to a head at the next HOA meeting, held in the community center a week later. The room was packed, every chair taken, with people standing along the walls. Karen sat at the head table, her face pale but defiant, as if she could still command the room. I stood beside Lila, her hand in mine, her presence a quiet strength. Mike and his squad were there too, their civilian clothes doing little to hide their authority. The meeting began with the usual agenda, but no one cared about lawn regulations or mailbox heights. Mrs. Ellison stood, her notebook in hand, and read aloud a litany of Karen's abuses, fines, threats, and now, the assault on Lila. The room erupted in murmurs, and Karen's face flushed red. "I've done nothing but serve this community," Karen shouted, slamming her hand on the table. But her voice was drowned out by a chorus of objections. Neighbors stood, one by one, sharing their own stories of her tyranny. A man spoke of a fine that cost him his grocery budget for a month. A woman recounted how Karen had threatened to evict her for a single late payment. The room became a courtroom, and Karen was on trial. Then Emily stood, her voice trembling but clear. "You hurt people, Mom. You hurt me." The words silenced the room, and Karen's face crumpled, not with remorse, but with the realization that she'd lost everything. Karen's collapse was not dramatic, not the kind you'd see in a movie. It was quiet, almost invisible, but it was complete. She sat back in her chair, her hands limp, her eyes staring at nothing. The HOA board voted unanimously to remove her as president, and the room erupted in applause, a release of years of pent-up frustration. Karen didn't protest. She didn't speak. She simply stood and walked out, her steps low, as if the weight of her actions had finally caught up with her. The neighbors didn't cheer or jeer. They watched in silence, their victory bittersweet. Emily followed her mother, her face a mix of grief and relief, and I wondered what their future would hold. For the first time, I saw Karen not as a monster, but as a woman broken by her own need for control. The police filed charges the next day, assault and battery, with Mrs. Ellison's and Emily's testimonies as the backbone of the case. Karen's lawyer argued self-defense, claiming Lila had provoked her, but the evidence was overwhelming. The marigolds, uprooted and scattered, became a symbol in the neighborhood, a reminder of Karen's cruelty and the community's awakening. Lila and I pressed charges, not out of vengeance, but to ensure she couldn't hurt anyone else. The process was slow, but it gave us closure, a chance to focus on the future. Our baby, our home, our life. Maplewood Lane began to heal. The HOA elected a new president, a kind man who prioritized community over control. Neighbors started talking again, sharing stories and laughter instead of fear. Mrs. Ellison's notebook became a legend, a testament to the power of quiet observation. Emily moved out, staying with a friend while she figured out her next steps, and I hoped she'd find peace. Lila and I replanted the marigolds, their bright petals a defiance of the past. Every time I saw them, I thought of Lila's strength, of the neighbors' courage, of the Marines who'd stood by us when we needed them most. One evening, as Lila and I sat on our porch, the sunset painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, she rested her head on my shoulder. "We're going to be okay," she said, her hand on her belly. I nodded, feeling the truth of it in my bones. The baby kicked, a tiny reminder of the life we were building, and I smiled. Karen's shadow was gone, replaced by a community that had found its voice. We weren't just survivors. We were stronger for it. The trial came months later, a quiet affair in a small courtroom. Karen sat alone, her lawyer's arguments unable to erase the truth. The judge's voice was steady as he read the verdict. Guilty. Karen was sentenced to community service and probation, a lenient punishment that still felt like justice. She'd lost her power, her reputation, and her place in Maplewood Lane. The neighborhood didn't celebrate, but there was a collective exhale, a sense that the scales had been balanced. Lila and I sat in the back, her hand in mine. Our baby, due any day now. We didn't need Karen's apology. We needed her to face what she'd done. And she had. Back home, the marigolds bloomed brighter than ever, their resilience a mirror of our own. Neighbors stopped by with gifts, baby clothes, casseroles, and stories of how they'd stood up to Karen in their own small ways. The Marines visited too, Mike leading the pack, their laughter filling our home with warmth. Sarah, the calm one, brought a tiny pair of booties, a playful nod to their military bond. James, the gentle giant, helped me build a crib, his hands steady as he shared stories of his own kids. Marcus, Ethan, and Lucas played cards with Lila, their banter easing her nerves as her due date approached. They weren't just Mike's squad, they were family now. One night, as Lila slept, I stepped outside and looked at Karen's house. It was dark, the for sale sign a silent admission of defeat. I didn't hate her anymore. Hate was too heavy, and we had too much to carry: hope, love, a future. The neighborhood had changed, not just because Karen was gone, but because we'd learned to stand together. Mrs. Ellison's courage, Emily's truth, the Marines' unwavering support, they'd shown us what community could be. I went back inside, kissed Lila's forehead, and whispered a promise to our unborn child. You'll grow up in a place where people lift each other up. Our daughter, Marigold, was born on a crisp autumn morning, her cries a song of life that filled our home. Lila held her, tears streaming down her face, and I felt my heart expand, big enough to hold them both. The neighborhood celebrated with us, their joy a tapestry woven from shared struggle and triumph. Mrs. Ellison brought a quilt she'd made, each patch a flower, a tribute to the marigolds that had sparked it all. The Marines came too, their tough exteriors melting as they cooed over Marigold's tiny fingers. Mike held her, his eyes misty, and said, "She's a fighter, like her mom." I nodded, my throat tight, knowing he was right. Maplewood Lane was no longer just a street. It was a community reborn. The HOA meetings became gatherings of ideas, not rules, with neighbors proposing block parties and garden projects. The marigolds spread, popping up in yards across the street, a quiet rebellion against the past. Emily visited once, her smile tentative but genuine. She was starting college, finding her own path, and I hoped she'd carry the strength she'd shown that day at the gate. Karen's house sold to a young family, their laughter a new sound in the neighborhood, a promise of better days. As winter approached, Lila and I sat on our porch, Marigold bundled in her arms. The marigolds had faded, but their seeds were safe, ready for spring. I thought of the journey, Lila's fall, the Marine stand, Emily's courage, the neighbors' awakening. It wasn't just about Karen's collapse. It was about what rose in its place. We'd learned that community isn't built on perfection, but on the messy, beautiful act of standing up for each other. Lila leaned against me, her voice soft. "We made it, Tom." I kissed her temple, my heart full. "We did," I said. "And we'll keep making it together."